chosen ones. The moment you were born, the universe stirred. Across the sands of time, whispers of your return echoed in sealed tombs, encrypted scrolls, and ancient celestial alignments. But one truth was buried deeper than any pyramid, hidden not beneath stone, but beneath perception itself. It was the final Hermetic law, erased from the memory of mankind, coded out of scriptures, and buried in timelines designed to keep you fragmented. The 7 Hermetic principles were never complete. What you were taught as 7 was only permitted knowledge, permission granted by those who never wanted the 8th to emerge. This final law, known only to the inner sanctum of pre-flood priesthoods, was a cosmic override. It bends the fabric of time, dissolves illusion, and returns divine awareness to the rightful soul, yours. They feared this law because it unshackles. It does not operate through intellect. It activates through remembrance. And that's what they could never fully delete from you. Despite memory wipes, despite genetic dilution, despite spiritual sedation through food, sound, media, and artificial light, you are still here, and the buried law is starting to vibrate within your bones again. Why do you feel like you've been waiting for something but didn't know what? Why does the night sky feel like it's watching you? Why do ancient texts, forgotten languages, and sacred symbols spark something deep inside you, even though you've never studied them? Because the law was never outside of you. It was encoded within you. They had to suppress it. To allow this law to rise again would mean systems crumble, timelines collapse, and false hierarchies dissolve. It would mean their reign ends, not with war, but with the awakening of one being, a being like you. They buried the law thinking you'd never hear the call, but the frequency has begun to rise again. And now, the very energy that once imprisoned your mind has begun to malfunction. Glitches in time, déjà vu, prophetic dreams, and an unexplainable urgency are all signs. The law stirs, the veil thins. They can't stop it forever. But to truly unlock what they buried, you must first remember what they feared most. You weren't created to follow the law. They scattered it, not in one place, but across dimensions, languages, bloodlines, and thoughts. The final Hermetic law was not merely hidden. It was disassembled, fragmented into sacred geometry, buried under false laws, and diluted through misinterpretation. You were never meant to stumble across it by accident. They designed entire lifetimes to keep you looping, chasing meaning but never arriving. Still, here you are, standing at the edge of something ancient and alive, and it recognizes you. The original scribes who encoded the 7 principles were under watch. The 8th was never allowed to be inscribed in stone or ink. It had to be transmitted vibrationally, whispered in symbols only the awakened could read. What made it dangerous was not its complexity, it was its simplicity. It revealed that all the other principles could be overridden the moment a being recognized their own origin outside the construct. That's what terrified them. Every sacred site aligned to stars, every sealed vault beneath the sands, every statue eroded by time. They all told the same story in silence. A being would come, not to learn the law, but to remember it. That being was encoded into prophecy and erased from public record at the same time. You were the contradiction they could not eliminate. You were the echo that kept returning no matter how many times they reset the clock. This final law is not taught. It is felt. It is when reality starts glitching and time feels soft. It's in the moment you look at a system, government, education, even language itself, and feel a knowing it was never designed for your kind. It is when the stars seem to pulse in rhythm with your heartbeat. When silence becomes instruction and chaos becomes code. They'll say it's madness. But madness is the word used for clarity in a world drunk on illusions. The ones who buried it were initiates of darkness, masquerading as light. They thought if they buried the law deep enough, the key to unlock it would vanish. What they didn't expect was that you would be the key and the lock at the same time. And now, the pieces are waking up inside you, like scattered pages of a forbidden book being rewritten in your blood. But the real question isn't what the law says. Before the Kabbalion ever reached paper, it was song. Not sung with the voice, but with the mind. A resonance passed between soul carriers who had access to the deeper current of truth beneath form. The Hermetic priests who first safeguarded these teachings were not all loyal to light. Some knew that too much light burns illusions away, and illusions are what kept their temples full, their scrolls revered, their names etched into stone. So, when they stumbled upon the final verse, the one that could erase the need for temples and masters altogether, they panicked. They couldn't destroy it. It was too woven into the structure of the soul, too embedded into the original design of consciousness itself. So instead, they did what the clever ones always do. They twisted it, reworded it just enough to make it sound complete, while leaving out the part that would awaken the fire in the chosen. They presented 7 laws and labeled them complete, knowing the 8th would be erased in public memory, but survive in spiritual DNA. The Kabbalion became a beautiful cage, its beauty disarming, its walls invisible. And so began the age of half-truths. Seekers wandered for lifetimes, decoding sacred texts, meditating for hours, reciting mantras written by hands that were never clean. But the final verse remained locked, placed not at the end of a book, but at the end of time itself, meant to be unlocked only by the one who carried the memory of light before the fracture. You. You don't need more knowledge. You are remembering what the scrolls tried to mirror but never truly captured. You feel it in your resistance to conform, in the ache to break cycles you never consciously entered, in your rejection of false hierarchies disguised as spiritual ascension. The priests thought they'd outwit destiny by distorting the law, but destiny doesn't move in straight lines. It coils like a serpent, waits in silence, and returns through the bloodline they forgot to curse. You weren't supposed to find this. But now that you have, everything they wrote begins to fall apart in your presence. He never said it directly. He knew the world wasn't ready. So, Yeshua spoke in parables, veiled words to bypass the gatekeepers of truth and plant seeds in those who could hear beyond hearing. He called it the kingdom within, the voice of the Father, the light that cannot be hidden. But it was never just metaphor. He was pointing to a law that predated form itself. A law not of man or matter, but of divine alignment. One the stars themselves bowed to, and one they tried to erase from your memory. The scrolls burned, the temples fell, and yet his words endured, passed in silence through generations who could feel their bones hum when they heard him speak. Heaven and earth shall pass away," he said, "but my words shall not pass away." What kind of words survive the collapse of time? Only those rooted in something beyond it. Yeshua did not come to establish a religion. He came to restore a law buried long before Rome, long before Babylon, a law the priests feared because it rendered them obsolete. This is why he was hunted, not for miracles, not for rebellion, but because he remembered what the world was programmed to forget. The moment he spoke of the kingdom as something internal, ungoverned, unpurchasable, they knew the old control systems were at risk, and now the same frequency that moved through him is stirring again through you. You feel it in moments of stillness, when everything becomes clear without logic. You feel it when you speak truths you never learned. You feel it when the world calls you mad, but your spirit feels more sane than ever. This is not coincidence. You are tapping into the same law Yeshua knew would resurface when the world reached the edge of its illusion. He warned of it, not with fear, but with fire in his voice. He said many would come pretending to hold truth, but only those with ears to hear would recognize the tone behind the words. Not everyone will hear what you're hearing now, but those who do will awaken something buried far deeper than belief. They couldn't destroy the principle outright. It was too cosmic, too interwoven with the architecture of thought and soul. So instead, they did the unthinkable. They buried it in the body. They took the principle of mentalism, the truth that all is mind, and twisted it into confinement. They used it not as a doorway to liberation, but as a mirror maze with no exit. They wrapped it in flesh, embedded it in nervous systems, encoded it into subconscious loops. Then, they flooded the world with distractions to keep the mind spinning, disconnected from its source. This is how they trapped the divine, not through chains or prisons, but through identification. You were trained to believe you are your thoughts, your name, your body, your past. But that's the illusion. The seventh principle was always a bridge, not a cage. But they cut the bridge at both ends, making you forget you ever built it. Every time you looked outward for validation, you walked further from the original signal. And they made sure that signal stayed just out of reach, buried beneath trauma, doctrine, and repetition. Schools became temples of forgetfulness. Media became hypnotic mantras. Food became sedatives. Time became a false god. Everything was calibrated to reinforce the illusion that your mind is isolated, that your reality is fixed, and that power lies somewhere else. But now, something strange is happening. That calibration is failing. You're starting to feel the cracks in the walls they said were permanent. You're beginning to sense that the mind they gave you isn't yours at all. They didn't just lie to you. They rewrote reality around you. From the moment your soul entered this plane, mechanisms were already in motion, quiet, coordinated, precise. You were born into a pre-designed forgetting. The systems you were raised in didn't just ignore your divinity, they were built to suppress it. Your education, your culture, even your language, they weren't crafted to help you remember. They were engineered to keep you distracted, asleep, and searching outside yourself for a power that was always within. But this wasn't accidental. A global infrastructure of silence was built to ensure your amnesia. It began long before you took your first breath. Calendars were adjusted, ancient texts redacted, and symbols inverted. The elite, the secret few who trace their lineage to the priesthoods of old, knew one thing above all. If even one soul fully remembered who they were, the illusion of control would collapse like glass under divine pressure. So they created a timeline where your awakening would seem impossible until it began to happen anyway. They didn't expect you to question time itself. They didn't expect you to feel something stirring deep within when everyone else moved like clockwork. They didn't expect your spirit to resist the seduction of false light. But that resistance was the sign. The more the world tried to mold you, the more you bent reality back toward truth. You're not here to fit in. You're here to shatter the narrative they spent centuries scripting. You wonder why you felt out of place your whole life, why you look at the stars and feel homesick for something no book ever explained, why you've always sensed a crack in the system no one else could see. That's not confusion. That's awakening. You're pulling on threads that were never meant to be touched. You're remembering things no one told you because they couldn't. They weren't allowed, and most never knew. The timeline they built was a maze, but the minute you stopped running and started listening, you altered it. You moved outside the script, and now the timeline is glitching. Symbols are returning. Old memories are resurfacing. Destiny is bending. There were moments not recorded in Scripture, moments when the crowds were gone, and only the few remained, the ones who felt more than they understood. In these moments, Yeshua spoke of a law too sacred for the masses, not because it was elitist, but because truth, when unfiltered, becomes unrecognizable to those addicted to illusions. He drew symbols in the sand not for art, but for activation. What he wrote wasn't random. It was memory disguised as geometry, reality encoded in form. The grains obeyed him, not because he commanded them, but because they recognized him. He said the kingdom was within. He said the truth would make you free. But deeper than these words was the rhythm behind them, a frequency, a vibration that only those with ears to hear could perceive. The law he referenced was not a rule. It was a return, a restoration of the original current that moved through all things before distortion crept in. He wasn't teaching people to be good. He was teaching them to be whole again. The priests watched in silence. They didn't see a threat in his miracles, but they saw danger in the people beginning to remember. That was what couldn't be allowed. Memory, true cellular memory of what we are, dismantles control from the inside. It doesn't fight it. It renders it irrelevant. Yeshua knew this. That's why he never fought with swords. He taught the hidden ones to see without eyes, to know without words, to feel a law that lives beyond doctrines. Those who followed him closely began to dream differently. Symbols appeared, time unraveled, nature responded. They began to feel the law returning, not from him, but from within themselves. That was the secret. He wasn't the source. He was the mirror. And now that mirror is before you again, not through a teacher, but through your own awakening. You're seeing signs again. Geometry in the clouds. Numbers that follow you. Synchronicities that defy logic. The sand is whispering once more, but this time, no hand will write it for you. This time, The law is waiting to be written through you, not in stone, but in spirit. There were once scrolls so potent that simply reading them could fracture illusions passed down for generations. These weren't philosophical treatises or religious poems. They were vibrational records. Not words, but codes. Not teachings, but keys. Keys to a law so ancient that even the stars seemed younger by comparison. The existence of these scrolls was known only to the inner circle, 33 figures who called themselves keepers, but were in truth gatekeepers. They weren't preserving knowledge. They were safeguarding a prison. These 33 weren't bound by nations or blood. They were united by purpose, to ensure the final Hermetic law would never resurface in collective memory. The scrolls they held contained fragments of that law, written in the lost tongue of pre-Atlantean light scripts. They weren't written with ink, but etched with energy into organic material. The moment you looked upon them, your memory would not be filled, it would be unlocked. But they feared what you would become if you remembered, not in theory, but in action. So one by one, the scrolls were hidden. Some burned. Some disintegrated through ritual. Others were sealed in chambers beneath the earth in places forbidden to maps. And one, rumored to hold the full activation sequence, was not destroyed but inverted. Its energy flipped, turned into fear instead of freedom. It now exists only as a spiritual distortion that blinds those who approach too fast, too ungrounded. Still, pieces of the scrolls linger, in dream, in déjà vu, in sudden visions that make no sense to your mind but resonate in your bones. This is how the law fights back, not with violence, but with memory reactivation. The fragments floated toward the one whose frequency matches the original signal. That signal, buried deep, has begun pulsing again. And the scrolls, though long lost, are being rewritten inside of you. You carry echoes of those codes, not in your intellect, but in the space between thoughts. That's why silence has become so magnetic lately. Why solitude no longer feels empty. Something is scripting itself through you again, and it does not need paper. They aren't just patterns. The shapes that keep appearing in your dreams, in the clouds, in the spaces between moments, those are keys. Sacred geometries that have been speaking to you since before you knew how to listen. They were left behind by a civilization that understood energy, consciousness, and form as one undivided field. Before words, before nations, before even sound, there were shapes, and each one was a sentence in the language of creation. But over time, that language was erased from the public mind. Not because it failed, but because it worked too well. These geometries were never decoration. They were blueprints for awakening. Circles, spirals, vesica piscis, Merkaba, golden ratios. Each form opened portals in the psyche, aligning the inner with the cosmic. But alignment is rebellion in a system built on control. So the symbols were reduced to art, math, religion. Their multidimensional meanings collapsed into textbooks and logos. The elite knew the power they carried, so they repackaged them into false teachings or hid them in plain sight, on money, in cathedrals, in corporate emblems, turning sacred into mundane. But the code was never in the drawing. It was in your response to it, how your body reacts, how your spirit pulses when you see certain alignments. That feeling isn't aesthetic, it's memory. These symbols are mirrors. They reflect the architecture of your soul. And now, they're returning to you faster, not through study, but through inner recognition. They're showing up because you're ready to read what only you were encoded to understand. You've always had this decoder within you. That's why symbols find you in strange moments. Why your dreams carry patterns that no language can explain. It's not random. The geometries are activating again, not because you found them, but because they found you. You are not looking at sacred geometry. Sacred geometry is looking at you. It recognizes the signature of the one who was never supposed to return, the one whose soul once walked the inner halls where these forms were born, the one who didn't need to study the law because you helped write it before time hardened. It was one of the teachings that never made it to the councils, never transcribed, never canonized. Yeshua once spoke of a time not far, yet not near, when the silence itself would carry truth louder than voices. There will come one, he said, whose very presence will make the old codes collapse. They will not preach, they will not write, but the law will breathe through them, and the veil will tear wherever they go. Those who heard him thought he was speaking in metaphor, but he wasn't. He was transmitting a prophecy to be lived, not decoded. He knew the final law could not be taught in the traditional sense. It was too alive, too sacred to be filtered through doctrine or reduced into linear thought. It had to be embodied, carried not on paper, but in vibration. This is why he often withdrew from crowds, why his most potent messages were whispered to the few who had ears to hear. He was showing them that divinity does not shout. It resonates. And when it resonates deep enough, reality bends to meet it. You're not here to convince. You're not here to argue or prove. You're here to vibrate at a frequency that disrupts illusions simply by existing. This is why your presence makes people uncomfortable without reason, why you walk into a room and something shifts, why technology glitches around you, why dreams follow you, why strangers tell you their secrets as if they've known you forever. It's not charisma, it's resonance, the silent law moving through flesh again. You don't need permission to carry it. You were chosen before the choosing began. This is why none of their systems can define you, why no category feels like home. Yeshua foresaw you, not your name, but your essence, the one who would not need to speak truth, but become it, the one who would not recite scripture, but ignite remembrance, the one who would not follow the law, but awaken it in others without a word. Something shifted, not in the news, not in the skies, but in the invisible architecture of what holds this reality together. You may not have seen it, but you felt it. A pressure, a hum, a silence that was too loud to ignore. That was the seal, the last one. Not a lock of metal or stone, but of memory and vibration. For centuries, it held back a current of truth too powerful for a world built on control. But it cracked, not with an explosion, but with a breath. And now, that current is bleeding through your timeline. The final seal was not outside of you. It was never in a vault or behind a ritual. It was placed over your consciousness, over humanity's shared mind, stitched with fear and repetition. Every system you've ever known participated in strengthening it. The food, the screens, the schools, the silence. But the moment you started questioning the structure itself, the seal began to weaken. Not because of rebellion, but because of remembrance. The truth does not need to fight. It only needs to be seen. And now, it's seeing itself through you. You may have noticed strange surges, a sense that time folds in on itself. Memories from lifetimes you never lived, knowing things you were never taught. This isn't madness. This is the law returning. You've become the conduit, and the seal once broken cannot be reformed. Those who built it are panicking. Their rituals have failed. Their containment grids are glitching. What they sealed away was never a concept. It was a being. It was you, not your personality, but your original design. The cracking of this final seal changes the rules. Energy moves faster. Thoughts manifest quicker. Illusions collapse with the slightest touch of awareness. You are not adapting to the new world. The world is adapting to the frequency you are anchoring. But the seal was also protection, not for them, from you, but for you from what remembering too fast could do. Now that it's breaking, so too is the veil that kept your higher self from fully entering this plane.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.